Hey everybody, just getting going on 2-2, or section 2-2, which is subtracting rational numbers. Where we've been so far, 2-1, we worked on adding rational numbers, and rational numbers meaning negatives and positive numbers and how we deal with those. So we're kind of moving on to the next portion, which is subtracting, and I want to take about 20 seconds on this slide here and just kind of make an observation for you so that you can kind of take this in. Positive 2 minus 6. I think everybody knows if we had 2, right, and I have a dot right above that 2, and we subtract 6, meaning we go backwards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, it's going to be -4. Let's make an X there by -4. However, when you're given a problem like this, 2 plus a -6, essentially you're doing the exact same thing. You're going to be starting at 2 and you're going to go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So although they look different, we're actually doing the exact same thing here. So 2 minus 6 actually equals the same as 2 plus a -6. And hopefully, what I teach you today and what I teach in the coming days will help clarify that. But I just kind of wanted to make that observation, I guess, for you before we get started. So please have your notebooks open. If we were in class, I'd have you get your notebooks out right now. And we're going to take notes on subtracting rational numbers. It's pretty short. It's not a ton. I think it's like 6 or 7 bullets maybe. And I have a couple examples below. So as long as you write those down in your notebook, whenever I get back to school, I'll look at them and it'll be an easy 5 out of 5 just for simply doing those. So let me flip over. And if you need to pause this video to get your notebook out or whatever the case may be, that's fine. But because I know you are in control of the pause button, I'm just going to push on. So this section is 2-2, subtracting rational numbers. And the biggest thing I can tell you before I even show the first bullet is please do not forget your steps from 2-1, adding rational numbers. The large majority of you did awesome with that. And we can't forget those steps because we're going to be continuing to do those when we subtract rational numbers. And I'll show you here momentarily. So the first thing I want you to do is to remember this term, and that's why it's underlined, but it's difference. Okay? And in math, the term difference or the word difference means the total amount resulting from, keyword here, subtraction or subtracting numbers. In 2-1, when we were adding numbers, the big term that we started off there was the sum. So when you take one number and you add it to another number, the answer is called the sum. Okay, so whenever you're adding numbers together, the answer is called the sum. With subtraction, if you're taking one number and subtracting it from another number, the answer is actually called the difference. And you may wonder, like, what's the big deal? Why do I need to know that? Well, a lot of times when you're given word problems, it's not going to tell you you need to subtract right now or you need to add right now. What it's going to do, it's going to say, please find the difference between these two numbers or find the sum between these two numbers. And that's why it's key for you to understand some of this math vocabulary so that you know the proper operation to do when you're given word problems. So that was kind of a long-winded way of saying when you have one number and you're subtracting another number, that's the difference. So if you're asked to find the difference on a word problem, it is subtracting. Okay, so the difference is the total amount resulting from subtracting numbers. Okay, number 2, or bullet 2 here, I'm going to give you the steps for subtracting numbers. Okay, these steps are going to be very similar to what we did with adding, but there's going to be one step at the beginning that we'll need to do, And then you're just going to follow the steps that I taught you when we added rational numbers. So I'm just going to show you both. I don't typically do this, but I'd rather just show you this first. So to subtract a number, when we're subtracting rational numbers, you're going to add its opposite. Okay, you're going to add its opposite. Okay, and what that does when you add its opposite is it's going to turn it into a problem like we did when we were adding rational numbers, and then you'll follow those steps. We're going to do some examples below, but I want to just type one in up here just to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up what I'm talking about. So let's say I had 2 minus, oh goodness, 2 minus 5. Let's just do that. 2 minus 5. Okay? So if you see this problem and you think, well, gosh, how do you subtract? I don't know what the steps are for subtracting rational numbers. What you're going to do is follow this first step, which to subtract numbers, add its opposite. Okay? So I'm going to make a copy of this. And instead of doing 2 minus 5, the opposite of minus is plus. Okay? And the opposite of that positive 5 is going to be negative 5. Okay? So essentially, I took this 2 minus 5 equals whatever, and I added the opposite. I took 2, adding instead of subtracting, and the opposite of 5 is going to be negative 5. So I created a new problem, 2 plus negative 5. Now, all of you, I know, kind of have an idea of how to answer these problems already because we did it. These would be opposite. These two numbers have the opposite sign. This is positive and this is negative. So I know the rule is to subtract their absolute values. 5 and 2. 5 and 2. And remember, we're subtracting their absolute values because they're different signs. 5 minus 2 I know is going to become 3. And then what number's bigger, 2 or 5? I know that 5 is bigger and 5 is negative, so our answer is going to be negative. Okay? So maybe you're like, wait a second, that's kind of goofy. First, we're going to go over a lot of examples. But second, if I can simplify it, you're doing the exact same thing you did last section when we added rational numbers, but there's one more step at the beginning, and it's taking that subtraction problem and turning it into an addition problem, and we do that by adding its opposite. In this case, instead of subtracting, we added, so we're adding the opposite of positive 5 is negative 5, and we created a new problem. Okay, to finish up, here is the rest of your notes. I list the steps for adding numbers with the same sign. These are the same steps that I gave you last section. We'll review them one more time. Adding numbers with the same sign. If they have the same sign, whether they're both negative or both positive, you're going to add their absolute values and keep the sign the same. If it's negative 5 plus negative 5, you're going to add those 5s together, which is 10. And then since it was negative 5 and negative 5, the answer is going to be negative 10. Or it's going to stay negative. The last little bit here, adding numbers with different signs. Just like I gave you an example up in the top right corner there. If the numbers have different signs, like this one, this is positive and this is negative, you're then going to subtract their absolute values like I did up here, 5 minus 2. And the sum has the same, or the answer has the same sign as the number with the greatest absolute value. So 5 minus 2 was 3. And because 5 was larger, or has a bigger absolute value, and it's negative, the answer was negative 3. So just this portion that's boxed in is review from 2-1. I would prefer you still write it just so we don't have to flip back and forth between 2-1 and 2-2. But there you go. So last thing we're going to do, just going to do a couple of examples here. So let me close this shade out. Okay, we have -4 minus 5. So let's go up here, right to where my mouse is. These are our two steps for subtracting numbers. To subtract a number, add its opposite. So -4 minus 5, going to take -4, and instead of subtracting, we're going to add its opposite. And so we're adding, and the opposite of 5 is going to be -5. Okay, now we have a new problem. We've turned it into an addition problem. You guys did awesome with these type of problems last section, so I know you're going to do fine with these. Now we have a new problem, -4 plus -5. They both have the same sign, meaning that we're going to add their absolute values. 4 plus 5 is 9. And because they're both negative numbers, the answer is going to stay negative. So there you go. Let's do another one. This one over here to the right. -5 minus a -7. Kind of a goofy looking problem, but -5 minus a -7. And when we're doing algebra, as weird as this looks, you're going to run across problems that look like this. So I'm going to show you how we deal with those. So we're going to write our first number down here, -5 minus, remember we're adding the opposite. So I'm going to put plus. And then the number we're given here is a -7. So if we're adding the opposite of -7, the opposite of -7 is +7. And there you go. We just created a new problem, and I know we know how to deal with these because we've done a lot of them. -5 plus 7. We have different signs, a negative number and a positive number, so we're going to subtract absolute values. 7 minus 5, we're subtracting their absolute values. 7 minus 5 is going to give us 2. And then I'm going to take a look at these two numbers, 5 and 7. I know 7 is larger and 7 is positive, so our answer is going to stay positive. So -5 plus 7 is 2. Okay. And just for good measure, I'm not going to do both of these down here, but we're going to do one of them. Let's do 10 minus a -5. So I'm going to write my 10. Remember, our first step when subtracting is to add plus instead of minus the opposite. What is the opposite of -5 is +5. And guys, we're not going to complicate this thing. If that's our new problem, 10 plus 5, we know what that is 15. And there you have it. So just to summarize, when subtracting rational numbers, the first step you're going to do is add the opposite, which turns it into an addition problem. And then you're going to follow the same steps that you learned in section 2-1 when we were adding rational numbers. We'll continue to practice these, but I hope it's at least a good introduction. Hopefully you wrote not only your notes, but also the examples down here. And thanks a lot for watching. I appreciate it.